Good
Uh,
morning.
Good morning. My name is Ben Portugal. Today is April 20th, and today I am interviewing Carl Ginsberg. Uh, what is your full name? Can you say for the
Yeah. My full name is Carl Harrelson Ginsberg.
okay. Do you know why your parents gave you that name?
Yes. So obviously my last name, my surname is the family name, my father's side. Harrelson is my father's mother's maiden name. And that side of the family is Gentile, actually.
Okay.
Um, and they had roots in Norway. Harrelson is the Norwegian name. I'm
Oh.
sitting down and we haven't met, but I'm 6'10", and so a lot of the height comes from that Norwegian side, some from the
Okay.
German side. And Carl is I am named after my mother's um, I believe paternal grandfather, whose wife was 6'2". They were from Frankfurt area, and
Oh.
so that's also where some of the height comes from. But there's also a bit of a legend on my mother's biological mother's side of the family. Her mother died young. Her father remarried, and the second wife adopted my mother. So the only grandmother I ever knew was my legal but not biological mother. So there was legend that was also that we were direct illegitimate descendants of the King of Württemberg. And so there was a King Carl, and so there's also sort of a secondary legend that I'm named after the King of Württemberg. But I don't know, shy of digging somebody up and doing DNA tests, I don't know how we could ever prove that. But I like to joke, better to be bastard royalty than no royalty at all.
Yeah. Yeah. How so were you born in Dallas?
I was born in Dallas. I have essentially lived, except for going to school a little bit, lived here all my whole life. I'm kind of a believer that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. So I'll tell you a little bit, how did I get to be here?
Okay.
And I'll start with my father's side of the family because they were here the longest. So my father's family were from, as I said earlier, his mother was Gentile, and I'll get to that in a little bit. She converted before she married my grandfather. But my father's family, the Ginsbergs, came to Dallas in 1920 from a little shtetl in Poland called Łuków.
Wow.
And the reason they came is because it was shortly after World War I. Poland had been reconstituted as a nation in 1918. It hadn't been a nation for well over 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that phenomena, you have a resurgence of nationalism, right? Is hooray, our nation is born again. But unfortunately, sometimes that has an undercurrent of anti-Semitism. And my great grandfather came from a long line of religious scholars. I think he was the first one, not in many generations, to be a rabbi. And he kind of saw the writing on the wall, which is good because they left Poland before the Shoah.
Yeah.
And so they decided they were going to emigrate and to the United States. And at the time, he came first and then brought his family over. And he came through Ellis Island. And he thought, well, how do you get to Dallas? How do you get to Texas? Well, he figured Polish Jews in New York, they're a dime a dozen. And he actually had a cousin, some kind of mashpucha, who was conscripted into the Tsar's navy in a pogrom, because that was all Russia up until 1918, and was conscripted into the Tsar's navy in a pogrom. The vessel was docked in Galveston. He jumped ship and made his way up to North Texas. So my great grandfather knew he has this sort of mashpucha in Texas. So he came to Dallas, and like I say, in 1920, and his family shortly thereafter My grandfather was one of 4 children.
Mhm.
He was, I think, 9 years old when he came, and he was the oldest. And the first 3 came. The 4th one was born in America, my great uncle. And so that's how we got to Dallas on that side of the family. And so I joke, at one level, my family's been in Dallas for 100 years. I just don't sound like it. And my mother's family is also a little interesting. My mother's parents were German, Jewish German. One side, father from Frankfurt area, mother from Munich. And they left late. I mean, they left in December 38, January 39.
Okay.
And they fled to India because that's where they were able to go.
Wow.
And they met in what was then called Bombay, now it's called Mumbai. And they met in Bombay. My mother was born there. My grandfather was a brilliant man, but for many reasons, some of which were related to anti-Semitism, had an 8th grade education.
Okay.
And so he went to work. Well, first he was put in a POW camp because it was British India and they were at war with Germany. And they figured, okay, he's okay. He's okay. You get let out. And then he went to work in a steel mill. And then he eventually ran the steel mill.
Wow.
And then he's buying and selling steel all over the world.
Wow.
So at that point, they say, okay, we're transferring you. And we're going to send you to some little town in the middle of nowhere, halfway around the world. And that town was called Dallas, Texas. So the family moved to Dallas. My mother was probably, I think she was, lived here, they were here about 2 years, 8, 9 years old. And they lived here, and they weren't here that long. My grandfather was always traveling. In fact, his wife told him, either you stay here with me and my daughter, or we're getting divorced, and he didn't. And so they got divorced. And I actually found the divorce decree from, I don't know, it was maybe 1951 or something like that, at the Dallas County Clerk's office. And now divorce decrees are 40, 50 pages. It's 1 page. And at that point, my mother and her mother didn't have, there's no reason to stay in Dallas, and they couldn't stay here, probably for visa reasons, but they were able to go to London. And so they moved to London. And then my mother, when her mother was 33 years old, my mother was 11, her mother dropped dead of an aneurysm at 33.
Wow.
And so my grandfather had since remarried a childhood friend from Frankfurt and relocated to Istanbul. And so my mother went to live with them in Istanbul. I'm getting there. Trust me, it's a long Magilla, but I'm getting there. And they lived in Istanbul. And the second wife then adopted my mother. So she was my legal but not biological grandmother, the only grandmother I ever knew. And she passed away in 2010 at 94. Wonderful, wonderful woman. I owe a lot of what I am today to her. And I'll talk about, my mother died young. So, so they lived in Istanbul until about 18. And then they emigrated to the States, to New York, and they were living on the East Coast. So this is where it comes to it. Because the family lived in Dallas for a while, and also my mother's uncle came to Dallas too, because where else were they going to go? The family was here. Her uncle, her mother's brother. And while he was here, he did some real estate investments. So he had some real estate investments here, and so he had a lawyer. So the lawyer was my father's uncle. And so one day, my mother's uncle was coming into town to meet his lawyer, my father's uncle. And so my father's uncle, Reuben Ginsberg, who's well known in the Jewish community in Dallas, he's deceased. And Reuben told my father, he said, do me a favor. I have a client. He's coming into town. He's bringing his niece. Do me a favor and take her out. And that's how they met. And so she was in college, and they courted, they got married, and she came to Dallas, and that's why I'm here.
Wow. That's cute. That's cool. What is your earliest childhood memory in Dallas?
actually, my parents didn't believe this when I told them, but I guess I was born with a hernia,
Mm.
and at 18 months, I had a minor corrective surgery as an infant, and I told my parents later, I was still a little child, about it. They said, you can't remember that. That's crazy. And I described how I was taken into the hospital room and the little clown rag doll the doctor took off the shelf and and uh, and other details. They're like, oh my God. He actually remembered this. My earliest childhood memory was 18 months having a hernia surgery.
Wow.
Probably not the answer you expected.
Okay. Um, how was your Judaism growing up? Where did you attend synagogue?
So we attended synagogue at Temple Shalom in North Dallas at Alpha and Hillcrest. We actually basically lived next door.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because I don't like to use the word religious or non-religious. I usually use the word observant.
Mhm.
We were never particularly observant, in the sense that we didn't regularly attend Shabbat services and that sort of thing. But obviously, we were um, uh, we were Jewish and clearly Jewish and identified as Jews and proud to be Jews. And I think the concept of Yiddishkeit is not always manifested in how many of the mitzvot in the Tanukah that you perform every day, and whether you wear talis. And I don't have a yarmulke on today, and
Mhm.
etc. But we went to Shalom. I was bar mitzvah at Shalom, and that was sort of the synagogue we grew up with.
Okay. Um,
And maybe a lot. This is getting away from me personally, but one thing I when talking about Yiddishkeit is that there were and Gentiles sometimes have trouble wrapping their heads around this, but um, I'll use the Yiddish word. Yiddishkeit is not just a religion; it's also a people. It's an ethnicity. It's a nationality. Before there were nations, we speak of the Indian tribe nations, and you have to remember we just had Passover in the story of the Exodus. There were Jews before there was Judaism.
mhm.
As a religion, Judaism is based in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible, the Tanukah, and so it's kind of hard to say that there was Judaism before the Torah,
Mhm.
but there were Jews before there was the religion.
Yeah.
Before there was the temple, before there was the whole story in the Torah, they were an identifiable group of people
Mhm.
that, and we just revisit our history at Passover, and
Yeah.
the whole story of the Exodus is the story of a people, pre Judaism.
Yeah.
And so I know that Gentiles often have trouble understanding that because they come from a perspective of their religion is purely a religion.
Mhm.
And we as Jews, we sort of we're on the one hand Judaism is a religion, on the other hand it's a people, it's a nationhood.
Yeah. Are there any Jewish agencies that you are involved with today?
Yeah, because of what I do for a living, I'm a little bit handicapped in what I can do, and so I'm a judge. I joke I'm a judicial Schrodinger's cat, and that I'm simultaneously a current and former judge. So I was a judge for 12 years of a civil district court here in Dallas County, full time. I've since left full time service as a judge, but in Texas we have something called visiting judges, where former judges can come sit ad hoc. I describe it to non-lawyers as like former teachers can be substitute teachers. It's kind of like that.
Mhm.
So because of that, I'm bound by certain ethical guidelines that apply to judges. And so that somewhat limits my ability to be, and I use quotes, active in various organizations, especially when it comes to fundraising. And
Okay.
quite frankly, when people want you to be on boards and things, they want you to take on part of that role. And the reason, and it makes sense, is that they don't want a perception where someone might feel that they're pressured to either give or be involved with an organization because the judge might, the way I describe it is, let's say you're a lawyer and you have a hearing in front of me next week and you're like, uh-oh, the judge is out soliciting money for whatever group.
Yeah.
And so, I've been asked a lot to do these kind of things, and I kind of politely say I can be involved in the sense that I, participate as a ordinary member. I can certainly donate myself, but I can't get involved at a higher level. But one thing that I have done, and I've thought it's been a great experience, is American Jewish Committee, among other organizations, but they do a lot of great work. And one thing I've done a couple of years is they have, as a lot of the Jewish communities building partnerships and coalitions because, is a minority by definition. In a democracy, you can't force through things with minority numbers. It just, you need a majority. And so it's a lot about building coalitions. And one thing AJC does is they have groups of German political policymakers that come to the States. It's sort of what I'd call an informal, private sector diplomacy. And we host them. They come to New York, Washington, and Dallas, because Dallas is so great. And we take them around. And I speak German, part of the German connection. I actually, and we can talk about that if you want to. Obviously, I'm an American citizen. I also have German and British citizenship because of some of the family history. And so, that's something that's rewarding because you get to try to build connections with people from around the world, and in the spirit of Tikkun Olam, hopefully make this world a better place.
Yeah. Okay. Why did you learn German? Just your family roots?
Yeah, it was. So when I was in school, unfortunately, so I'll be 53 and very shortly. And so when I was a student, unfortunately, we didn't learn languages in foreign languages as growing up as kids. When and where I went to school, we actually we didn't take any foreign language until the 7th grade, and we took Latin required in the 7th and 8th grade. And then in high school, at that time, we could either take German, Spanish, or French. The majority of I went to a school at St. Mark's here in Dallas. Most of the students at that time took Spanish. A minority took French, and even a smaller minority took German. And my thought was really twofold. One was the family history. My family's from Germany. That's, just part of my, as we say in German, meine Wurzeln, my roots. Also helps you understand Yiddish better because they're similar. But and part of it was the idea that German it's a really difficult language to learn. I think Mark Twain once said, "Give me a person of average intelligence, and I can teach them to speak English in 30 days, French in 30 weeks, and German in 30 years." And so my thought was, if I'm going to learn German, it's now or never. I'll learn Spanish later in life. My parents said, "You're in Texas, take Spanish." I said, I thought I'll learn Spanish later in life, which I did. I took community college classes after work as a professional, and I just have a gift for languages. I speak various levels of proficiency, probably 6 languages. And so that's why I took German, and I continued in college. It was one of my majors. I finished college semester early, and between that law school, I spent about 5 months working in Frankfurt. Doing in German they call it Praktikum, which is an internship at a bank. So Um, yep,
Yeah.
and I actually have proof. So there's the American one,
Oh, wow.
the German one, and there's the British one.
Wow.
And that's because the short answer is birth, descent, and restoration. As I told you, my mother lived in Britain for a while, and she
Yeah.
became a British citizen. So I was born to a British mother. And Germany, it's interesting. Because of obviously what happened during the war, during the Shoah, and what they had something called the Nuremberg laws, which
Yeah.
these were the laws that basically said, Jews, you're no longer German citizens. Which interestingly, during the entire Third Reich, the parliament, which was a rubber stamp, only enacted 4 laws, because Hitler ruled by decree. He didn't even bother going to parliament, even though it was a rubber stamp. So the entire legislative output during the Third Reich of the parliament there was 4 laws, and 2 of them were the Nuremberg. Interesting trivia. In any event, so the post-war Constitution says basically, in a sense, if your citizenship was taken away because of the Nuremberg laws, you can have it back. And not just you, but your descendants, on the theory that your descendants would have had it but for the deprivation of the ancestor. And, that opens up another topic, sort of German-Jewish relations. And I know people of a certain generation, they would never imagine going to Germany or traveling to Germany or speaking German. And I totally understand that. And I've had these discussions with people. Of course, what was committed was an atrocity. You never ever can forgive what happened. But at the same time, how many generations, the second, third, fourth generations after, how long are you associated with, the sins of your parents? And I will actually say that I think people today, people of your age in Germany today, they, as a nation, I think today has undergone a real national catharsis. You go to Berlin, for example, you come out of one of the subway stations near the HDW, a big department store, and they have a big sign that says, in German, Schrecke des Orten, Orte des Schreckens, places of horror, and they list concentration camps. And then it says, nie vergessen, never forget. And I think in a way that's pretty remarkable that as a nation, they have this sort of, like I say, national catharsis. And other nations obviously didn't commit things as horrible as the Shoah, but did other bad things and haven't had that kind of national catharsis. I met somebody who was probably a little older than you. He was from Potsdam. I was in Germany. And when he found out I was Jewish, he very sincerely, he said, "I'm sorry." And he was apologizing for something obviously he didn't do. Yeah. His parents didn't do it. He's that removed. And so I'm actually, there's hope that peoples, not necessarily individual people, but over time, that people can come to grips with their history and realize, and change for the better. Yeah, true. So you said you were a judge. Why did you want to become a lawyer? Oh, I could give kind of a flippant answer and say, like, well, I always like to argue. I think part of it is my father is an attorney. My father's still alive, 85 years old, practicing law. Although he is a young lawyer, started doing real estate law and then started doing real estate development, kept his law license, but stayed an attorney. Okay. And then he got back into it later in life. So, and I have a lot of attorneys. I told you earlier, my great uncle was an attorney. So we have a lot of attorneys in the family. So there was a sense of familiarity about it, number one. And it's a flexible degree. When I was in college, I told you I studied German. I studied classical studies, so ancient Greek and Roman history and Latin and ancient Greek and all this sort of thing. And I was kind of vacillating. Do I get a PhD in classics and become an academic, or do I go to law school? And ultimately, I decided, well, I'm going to go to law school because there's a lot more versatility of the degree, and you can do a lot more. And as an aside, I have a friend who had the same thoughts, and he ended up getting a PhD in classics, and now he's a tenured professor in New York. And when I go up there and we have lunch, it's almost like we're checking out what life might have become had taken the other route. But and this sounds a little corny, but it's kind of true. My first year out of law school, I worked for an appellate justice. We call it clerkships. 1 year out of school, and basically, you help them write opinions and stuff. And the justice for whom I worked, she had like a poster on her wall that said, "Equality, justice, freedom. Without lawyers, these are just words." And that's true, because these are abstract. Justice is an abstract idea, but it doesn't just happen on its own. You need lawyers to work the machine of justice. And so, I'm blessed. I had a very good education, always did well in school. And, people with my profile, they tend to go to, work in what we sometimes call big law or tall building lawyers, and represented those with power. I'll just put it that way. And that's not the career choice that I made. I went a different route and basically represented people that didn't have power. And I'll just leave it at that. And that was, part of why I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And I'll just give an aside. People sometimes, you get all these kind of questions when you're a campaign, when you run for judge, because we elect judges in Texas. And sometimes people say, well, what was your biggest case, or your greatest case? And I would tell people, I said, my proudest accomplishment as a lawyer, I wouldn't necessarily say was any given case, because they're all important. Every client's important, and to them, their case is the most important.
Yeah.
But I would say, and this is kind of maybe a reflection of our values, we were a small office. We had 3 lawyers for the most part, and limited number of staff. And businesses of that size, whether law business or anything, generally don't provide health insurance. And not only did we provide health insurance to our staff, but we paid 100% of the premiums. So I would always tell people that was my proudest accomplishment in my law practice.
That's good. What's the most interesting part of being a lawyer or a judge?
Well, answer from the judge perspective. I tell people that the courts are involved in resolving disputes. I'll say on the civil side, that's what I did. And you can have a dispute in every area of human endeavor. So we truly saw a cross section of humanity, because not just in the kind of disputes that they had, but the people involved. And another thing is, you can have a whole conversation about is electing judges a good or bad thing, but one of the byproducts of that is that you have to get out of the house, so to speak, and get into the community, and communities, plural, and it takes you out of your bubble, because a lot of us, if you're a lawyer, you went to law school, you have a certain educational degree, you kind of come from a little bubble, and you get out of that bubble. And so one thing that I think, having been a judge, is really helped me just as a person, grow as a person, is it takes you out of your bubble and really makes you realize there's an entire world out there that I might never have come into contact with had I not been a judge. And it just broadens your perspective on things.
Yeah. Okay. Are you married? Do you have kids?
I'm not, don't have kids. I joke. I guess I've been lucky so far. I do have a
Okay.
very large family, though. There are a lot of mashpocha in Dallas. Not all of whom are named Ginsberg. I'll tell you a little anecdote, funny story about that. So, again, when I told you I was a judge, I had to run for office, and when we first ran for office, a lot of us, we were sort of interested in the way judicial politics work. But in any event, there are other people that are running kind of on your same ticket, so to speak. And people would ask questions like, "Oh, well, does anybody know anybody like in the billboard business? Oh, I got a cousin that does that." Or, "Does anybody know somebody in this part of town? Oh, I got a cousin." So the joke became, if all of Carl's cousins vote for us, we'll get elected. And so with that background, I and a colleague were attending a judicial conference run by Northwestern Law School at the time in Chicago. And we were in Chicago, staying in a hotel, and we had one night off, and my colleague said, "Hey, let's go have dinner." I said, "That sounds great." He said, "Well, I'll ask the concierge for, a list of recommendations." So he goes to the concierge and he gets 3 names.
Mhm.
And he, restaurant A, restaurant B, and it's in the Weber Grill. And I smile like a Cheshire cat and I say, "You are never going to believe this, but the manager of the Weber Grill is my cousin." And he just like, "Oh my God, we're in Chicago and we still can't get away from Carl's cousins."
That's funny.
That was on my mother's side of the family, but so we have a lot of mishpocha.
Okay. Okay. What advice would you like to leave for the next generation?
That's a tough one. And I often preface these by saying that free advice is worth what you pay for it.
Mm.
A couple things, and none of these are original. Teddy Roosevelt once gave a speech, I think it was called The Doctrine of the Strenuous Life. And one of the key phrases for that is, step into the ring. Another way of articulating that is, it's often said that, I'd rather be lucky than smart.
Mm.
And if being lucky is being at the right time at the right place, then get out of the house, because you're never going to be in the right time in the right place if you're, sitting in front of the TV watching ESPN with a bucket of KFC, right? Whatever it is in life, you're gonna, the more at bats you have, the more likely you're to encounter opportunities. Meet people, and whether that's, I don't necessarily mean that in the sense of intimate relations, a spouse, but whatever in your career and opportunities, the more you get out of the house, so to speak, and actually meet and engage with people. So get involved in your community, even if it's just as whatever, just joining a bowling league or whatever. Just get out of the house. And so I would say that. So I told you I was a classics major, so I'll give you some advice from ancient Greece. At Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, were inscribed a number of maxims, and 2 of them, probably the most well-known in Greek, they're gnothes auton and kai meden agan. And gnothes auton means know yourself. So you need to have a really deep understanding of who you are, what makes you tick, what do you enjoy doing, because if you don't know who you are, it's difficult to find your place in the world. And merenagan means nothing in excess. You know, a life of moderation. Don't go crazy.
Yeah.
So, and then what else? Always believe in yourself, because sometimes you will be the only one who will.
Mm.
And I mean that seriously. Sometimes we haven't talked about this, but when I was a little kid, I had, now that they give it fancy names like ADHD and whatever, you know, back then we just called it hyperactive.
Mm.
And, you know, certain educational experts, you know, they told my parents, well, you know, he'll be lucky if he ever finishes high school. You know, his goal is to, you know, hopefully keep him out of jail and maybe get a, you know, trade, learn a trade, like how to be an auto mechanic or something. And well, luckily my parents believed in me, but I believed in me. You know, that I didn't go down that route.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, sometimes life will present challenges to you, and sometimes you're the only one that will be able to overcome them. And you can, but you just have to realize that you have to rely on yourself sometimes.
Mm.
And related to that is, you know, when you get knocked off the pedestal, get up again.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, this is all free advice, so it's worth what you pay for it.
Yeah. Okay. That's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you would like to add in the interview?
No, I just want to thank you all for doing this. I think it's, I wish, you know, my grandparents and my great grandparents would have had an opportunity to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's great to, I don't know, maybe in 100 years, people will be watching this and think, who is that goofball, Carl Ginsberg?
Yeah.
But you know, I will say one thing. I don't know if this book would appeal to anybody who's not named Ginsberg, but there is actually a book, and I didn't write it, so I'm not getting any royalties out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called The Ginsbergs, a family biography. It's written by Lorraine de Meaux, who's a French academic. And the Ginsbergs, as I said, my father's family came from Poland. But before that, deeper into the Russian Empire. And before that, they came from a town called Ginsberg, which is a little town in Bavaria. And it is on the river, it is where the rivers Danube, in German, the Donau, and the Gunst come together. And so they left, this was in the early 1600s, I believe, because as you know, Jews lived in these little communities throughout the German-speaking lands. Mm-hmm. And they would typically loaning money, and then the sovereign of the area, whether they were the Grand Duke or the whatever, decided, well, you're not useful anymore, we're throwing you out. And so they went to, at the time, what was the liberal, tolerant, open society of the time, which was the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania. So they went to Vilnius, which is currently in Lithuania, and eventually the Russian Empire. In any event, obviously, you know, I found it interesting because it's my family, but I think anybody that wants to have an understanding of Jewish history and Ashkenazi Jewish history, I think it's pretty fascinating, because there are some pretty remarkable people. Mm-hmm. And one of my ancestors, they were, he actually was made a baron. He was made ennobled to be a baron by the Grand Duke of Hesse-Darmstadt, and he was a real benefactor in then Russia of the Jewish community, and really was almost like a patron of the Jewish community, constantly trying to convince the Tsar to be less cruel to the Jewish community and afford privileges to the Jewish community. He was a very religious man. He had one of the largest collections of scholarly Jewish writings. And so I would hope it's interesting to anybody who's interested in sort of modern Jewish history. But
Yeah.
so hopefully, even if your name isn't Ginsberg, you might find the book interesting.
Okay.
I did, and and it opened my eyes a lot to my family. Some of these things I knew as bits and pieces and legends, and then you actually read it from an academic's compilation, like, oh, okay, yeah, it all comes together.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.